Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach those who work remotely and those who hire them how to work better together. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, as always, today's show is brought to you by TeamMadeApart.com. Team Made Apart features articles, tools, and resources designed to teach remote workers and those who hire them how to work better together. A community for owners, managers, leaders, freelancers, contractors, and all variety of remote worker, Team Made Apart is also a terrific resource for companies interested in implementing remote work policies in otherwise co-located environments, or for those planning to build fully distributed organizations from the jump. Listeners of this podcast have an exciting opportunity to get involved in the remote work revolution. In light of current events related to the coronavirus pandemic and a sudden worldwide shift to remote work, we're offering a free remote work best practices guide for leaders who find themselves struggling to create a remote work policy in a pinch. Now, and for the duration of the crisis, visit teammadeapart.com/crisis to not only download your free Team Made Apart Remote Policy Primer, how to write remote work policies that don't suck, but to find other tools and resources to help you weather the storm. Great working relationships make for great remote work experiences, and with this free guide, you'll be better equipped to do your part in creating and maintaining a happy and sustainable remote life. Once again, to take advantage of this collection of useful resources, please visit teammadeapart.com/crisis, that is teammadeapart.com/crisis, to download your free best practices guide. One more thing before we kick off the show. Now, and for the foreseeable future, TeamMadeApart.com is offering free support and advice to remote workers and remote leaders alike through Team Made Apart Open Office. From noon to 2 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday, you can visit TeamMadeApart.com and navigate to the bottom left-hand corner of the page where you'll find a chat icon. Simply click it and you'll be connected to a real, remote work expert who is happy to help you solve problems in real time at no charge to you. Of course, you can use the same tool 24/7, 365 to ask questions or request services, but during open office hours, you've got a direct line of communication to people who care and people who can help. Once again, from noon to 2 p.m. Mountain Time, Monday through Friday, simply navigate to teammadeapart.com, find our chat icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the page, then click for instant support when you need it at no cost to you. Take advantage of this special program while it lasts, and now, back to the show. This week's special guest is none other than Betsy Andrews. Betsy is a career counselor and resume writer for FlexJobs, one of the best-known platforms on the web for finding remote work. In her role at FlexJobs, Betsy provides career coaching and resume writing services for job seekers from a broad range of backgrounds, experiences, and unique individual circumstances who are focused on finding fully remote and flexible working opportunities. Now, in these uncertain times, her expertise and advice is more valuable than ever, so without further delay, join me in welcoming Betsy Andrews to the show. Hey, Betsy, welcome to the show. So glad to have you. Let's get started by just telling me a little about yourself, who you are, where you come from, and why we're talking.
Alrighty. I'm a career coach and resume writer at FlexJobs, which is a completely online company that helps job seekers that are looking for remote or flexible positions or a combination of that be able to move forward in their job search capabilities.
How did you get into this sphere of remote work? I mean, as we've discovered, doing research for this show and talking to other guests, the battlefield of remote work or trying to find remote work is really complicated. How did you find yourself doing this kind of work specifically?
Doing fully remote work I actually kind of fell into, and the partial remote work that I was doing previously, I fell into it, which you do find a lot with customers where it became a perk. So former positions that I held, I worked for state entities and nonprofits and private corporations, helping people that had some sort of barrier to employment with their resumes and how to apply for positions and that type of thing. And I did a lot of traveling back and forth or meeting with them via Skype, Zoom, those types of things. A couple of years ago, my husband and I decided to, have a midlife crisis. And so we relocated from Southeast Minnesota to Colorado. And when we did so, we knew that we'd want to be in a remote area, a very rural area up in the mountains. So I started doing a little bit of research on how could I continue my career without actually having to drive anywhere. And I just kind of stumbled across FlexJobs and started looking on there. And then after we moved here, they had an opening for doing career coaching, resume writing, those types of things. And so I applied, and here I am.
Well, that's awesome. So do you come from a background of resume writing and this type of work? Is that what you had done previously?
Yes. When I originally started within the field, it was within education for a university that had some online courses and then some classroom courses. And so it was helping people figure out what they wanted to go to school for, but then afterwards also helping them with their resume writing. And then after that, I shifted into helping people that had some sort of disability but were able to work. And received referrals from like vocational rehabilitation services. And then after that, I worked with at-risk youth with the state, and then moved to a nonprofit working with youth from 16 to 24. So a lot of how do you get a job, having a good work personality, I guess you could say, building those skills up, and, connecting with references and teach people how to do that, and thank you notes. And then, so I've done just kind of a hodgepodge of things. And then with this one, it's more focused on remote work and flexible work that people are seeking, but it's a huge plethora of types of individuals that I'm working for that could have anything going on that I had done previously that was more focused.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting too. And you mentioned one group of people in particular, the people who are maybe wheelchair bound or confined to a home. I feel like, so much of the discussion I see is, people in third world countries. And, even in my own advocacy, it's a little bit of that. It's a little bit of people in small towns. It's a little bit of that kind of stuff. But I mean, really, God, remote work would be a great option for people who can't leave the home, or who are medically disabled or have some kind of problem that keeps them from leaving the house.
Right. It really, that is something that I love about remote work. And even when I was just specifically working with people that had disabilities, we would seek out different remote opportunities, because sometimes it's not even just a physical limitation. It could be a really huge aversion to any kind of sense, or they've had cancer previously and they're trying to stay as healthy as possible. And as going into an office, there's germs everywhere.
Yeah.
People that have some sort of mental health issues that they just do better not being around a lot of people. I mean, it really can answer to a lot of different scenarios where they wouldn't necessarily have to let an employer know that they have that disability, because that accommodation is already put in place without them having to ask for it.
Yeah, I love that. I actually had a conversation on a different podcast once with a woman named Chantel Sumas, who does a lot of differently abled advocacy, is what she calls it. And in her case, she's, this really cute, bubbly personality. She actually lives out in Minnesota, I think. But she basically developed epilepsy and started having a lot of problems. So in her 20s, sort of the prime of her life, she was having to wear a diaper and all these other problems, and so she found that she actually had a really hard time getting work just for,
Right.
People aren't discriminating, but, that's definitely something that gets factored in, whether you mean to or not. And so she had a really hard time finding work that would sort of put up with that. So in her case, she started working remotely or finding opportunities that she could do over the internet just to sort of get around even just the embarrassment of having to go out and do the, meeting process or the application process. So I think that's a tremendous space, for people who have different conditions or different problems to look at remote work. So
I completely agree.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, but really great collection of experience, and I guess that prepares you completely, or very well, to be able to handle just about anything that gets thrown at you. What kind of skills do you think one should consider when they start to look for a remote job, when they begin this hunt and they've made the decision to either go remote or maybe find a new job in the remote work place? What do you think are the types of skills that they should probably consider? And I think we're talking probably internally, like what sorts of things should they be bringing to the table if they go to look for remote work?
The first thing that I advise people to do is really, really be honest with yourself on whether or not you're built for a full-time remote position or a partial remote position. Because everybody has different types of personalities. For myself, I'm an introvert. I like having interaction with people, but I also like doing my paperwork. And if I have too much interaction with people, it tends to tire me. Whereas I have a friend that just feeds off of being around people all of the time. And when she was in a transition, I kind of sat down with her and said, are you really sure that you could handle the remote work? Because, or remote environment, that's the word I was looking for, because she does feed off of that interaction and that person-to-person interaction. I wasn't really sure that that would be something that would fulfill her for the long term. So some people do better with it. So it's really going back onto what you've done previously. And if you've brought homework, like completing a project, or if you're sending out emails or whatever, if you're finding that you're more productive when you're able to work within a quiet environment without a lot of people around you, those are really the people that should, I believe, be searching for those remote positions, because they'll be able to excel at a faster pace many times. Remote employers, first and foremost, are going to be looking at wanting to know what your communication skills are. And not only verbal communication, but your written communication needs to be very, very strong, because that's how we're collaborating. We're using Slack, we're using Sococo, we're using different platforms and typing all day long. And making sure that the way that we're speaking via written text is they're taking it in the way that we meant, because I'm sure we've all been there where I typed something and that was not received in the manner that I expected it to. Self-initiative, being able to really reflect that within your cover letter and within your resume and within interviewing. They're going to ask those really pointed questions of, yes, you can always say that you have self-initiative, but they're going to want actual examples. They're going to want examples of your communication skills. They're going to want examples of your time and task management and how you really succeed in that, because you're going to have to, because you aren't going to have that manager right next to you or popping into your office to make sure that you're on task.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, because I think, so much of it has to do with intention. There's so many people that want to go into remote work, maybe because they're buying into the vision of the guy working from the beach, or they've got, some sort of fantasy of this idea that they get to stay home in their pajamas and watch TV. They're thinking of sort of the instant gratification aspect of working from home. And, and it can be a little glamorous, or look a little glamorous at first, because they're not thinking long term. But I think that this idea of being a self-starter and these things, like, I don't think a lot of people are thinking about that. So I think it's really important that people set a great intention up front. Why am I looking to go remote? Is it, maybe I've just had a kid and I want to get back into the workforce, and, remote job would be great. I could stay home with my kid, or maybe there's some flexibility involved. I need to be able to go, pick up somebody, or, I have to help my mother-in-law or something, in the afternoons. And it'd be great if I could kind of work around that. I also think, though, that there's a lot of opportunity in that flexibility for people, maybe in small towns or in difficult parts of the world and things like that, where they can sort of leverage this, boon in technology to find great work opportunities outside of where they live.
Right.
What do you see for like the differences between, I guess, let me see how to phrase this. So
Okay.
the first-time job seeker versus somebody who's come back for more, like maybe they've had a job before, but they're trying to maybe move up in a company or to another location or something like that. What do you see between the two? Like somebody who's coming at it totally green and somebody who's been there before, how do they craft a resume to stand out in front of, an audience? I mean, obviously showing remote work is probably valuable, but, so putting that on a resume is probably of value for the person who's worked remotely before. But if you're that green guy and you don't have the experience, how do you get it? Like, how do you make yourself stand out?
Right. So there's two different situations in there that I want to kind of address, because there's green people that are re-entering the workforce and maybe haven't worked at all for the last few years. And then there's people that they've been working within an office environment and want to pivot into remote. So which one are you asking that question for? Or do you want me to address both?
Well, if you've got time, let's cover both, just because I think that, we might be able to reach more people that way. But I think probably the lion's share of people are probably not first timers at work. They've probably had a traditional job before and now are looking to move into remote.
Okay.
I guess that's me making a generalization, but maybe that's true.
Okay. So going off of that platform, the majority of positions anymore, like you said, we're all working with technology, whether we're sitting in an office or not. So within a resume, it's really going to be highlighting whether you've worked remotely or haven't before. The majority of time, if we're sitting at an office, we're still working within distributed team environments. We're still utilizing chat. We're utilizing WebEx for webinars. We're sending emails back and forth to people. We're doing those types of things. So it's highlighting within the summary of your resume that you have experience working within distributed team environments, and having a focus on your communication skills. And then for anybody looking for remote work, I highly, highly, highly recommend having a technology section on your resume as well that will list out remote collaboration tools, and then listing all of those that you're familiar with. Don't have to be an expert, just a familiarity. And then listing out like document tools like Microsoft and Google Drive. And then if they know any customer service platforms such as Salesforce, any marketing for like WordPress, and really, really highlighting their technology skills will be a plus going forward with remote employers, because that's generally one of their biggest concerns is, well, okay, they'll do great in an office, but how are they going to communicate with each other? And so if you already have that skill set, just reflecting it a bit more broadly on your resume and a cover letter, but really, really on the resume, because they'll read those more often, is going to be very important. Just to touch upon the individuals that maybe, a mom or dad that's been at home for a while, taking care of kids, or they've been taking care of a family member, or they just took a couple years off to go traveling. I talk to a lot of people that do that. Putting something on your resume of a planned career break, listing out any volunteering you've been doing, or if you've done any traveling, but really filling that gap within the experience that you have on your resume so that employers aren't guessing of why there's a gap there. Give them the information so they can move on as they're glancing through your resume.
Oh, that's good advice. I've never thought of that before. I know that I've been guilty in the past of submitting a resume and like maybe there was some non-pertinent work experience in the middle there. And so I'll just leave it out, right? And so, but I've noticed, or it's never occurred to me how that might look. This idea that, well, God, there's 4 years of your career that's just missing there. Like,
right.
What happened?
And actually, for people, because just for instance, I had somebody that they'd been doing IT for years, and then they decided that they wanted to do their dream, and they opened a restaurant, and it ended up not being exactly as beautiful as they thought it would be, and they're working themselves to the ground. I actually listed that as the professionally active career break, because they were still working, they just weren't working within that field, and then listed out the accomplishments underneath that. So again, don't have a big hole in your resume. But also want to put the caveat in there of a resume should only reflect 10 to maybe 15 years of experience. You don't have to go back through your entire career. And we really tell people don't do that, because you want to be able to sidestep any kind of ageism that may be happening.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not that relevant that, you spend a year and a half flipping hamburgers somewhere when you were 17, so right. I suppose that makes sense to leave that off. But but the ageism aspect is something that's kind of interesting too. How do you see that playing out in remote work? I mean, have you come across a sort of inherent bias or anything to do with young people are better at technology? Or, I mean, actually in my experience, I've seen quite a number of people who are sort of my age or older that are excelling in remote work. I mean, what do you think that is? Or do you think that ageism sort of is a real problem in remote work?
I think ageism is anywhere, whether it be brick and mortar or remote work. There are going to be employers that unfortunately it's a thing. It's just going to happen. So the really good ways to deflect that, like I said, is have that technology section. Don't have just like Microsoft Word listed. People forget how much they actually do know technology. And then kicking out some of those older things that we used to put on resumes that it's no longer a thing. Like instead of having an objective, have a summary paragraph or profile summary, list out key skills. Don't have the really long experiences on your resume. If there are things that are older than 10 or 15 years that you really feel are relevant for this position that you're applying, you can have the information on there, but take the dates off. One of the things that I tell people all the time is if we have somebody on the lowest part of the totem pole that may be 25 in HR looking at our resume and we have something listed there from 1995, that was 25 years ago. So automatically they're going to think we're ancient. My kids do, they're in their 20s. I get that. Other little things to take off is like take references off, or even statement references available upon request. That's no longer a thing. Employers know that if they want references, you will provide them. So taking some of that stuff off, and also just weird formatting things like back in the day, the only font that everybody said to use was Times New Roman. That's no longer a thing. You can on like the headers, but for the body of the text, it should be something like Arial or Calibri, because so many recruiters and hiring managers are reading on smart devices that they want the more sans serif instead of the serif fonts.
Sure. Well, and so maybe that's a good thing to sort of segue into this next question. So one of the things that, at least in the past, I'd be curious to get your take on it, is this idea of people, especially in my industry and sort of the creative industry, are known for trying to put together really kind of flowery or cool resumes, right?
Right.
We're designers, therefore we must design, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I assume this happens across other trades too. There are people who try and, make their resume stand out by virtue of being well designed or whatever. And what are your thoughts on that? And then as it pertains to overcoming some screening issues.
Right. Yeah, that is something that we address very often as resume writers, in that people will provide us with resume, we go to rewrite it. And unfortunately, there's so many templates out there, even on Pinterest, that are super fancy, or even in Microsoft Word that are too fancy, in that a lot of the applicant tracking systems, the artificial intelligence that 60 to 70% of employers are using, it can't read those at all. So it's not going to pick up on your great graphics. It's completely kicking it out. And for some of them, they can't read information that is put into columns or text boxes or tables. So it's really bringing that formatting back down to a more traditional layout, and not having all of those pictures and everything going on, because the machine's going to kick it out. And what happens if the machine kicks you out and your document out, it means it's never making it to a human being. And that is our goal, is to get our document in front of those eyes of that first person reading it, and catching their attention with our skills and our qualifications, rather than the pictures that we have on the side.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. And maybe let's talk a little bit more about the screening step. So one common problem in remote work is, well, it's a problem, or it's a gift or a curse, or maybe both, is that, because of the global availability of some of these jobs, or what, or at least, national or really broad availability, a lot of times, instead of competing against the 30 people who live in the vicinity of the place you're applying to, you're competing with 800 people, 1,000 people, 500 people, whatever it is. And
Right.
so, they do employ a lot of these systems for kind of weeding out the, at a high level, trying to cut off as many as they can cut off, for the simple fact that they just can't look at 1,000 resumes. They just can't.
Right.
And so, we just talked a little bit about how we can overcome AI by just keeping things kind of straightforward and things like that. But do you have other pointers or other ways to sort of work our way to the top and get to that all important human being?
What's really going to be important, whether they're using an ATS or not, is really looking at if you're applying for a job, really looking at that job description and figuring out what those key terms and phrases are that they're seeking and how they have it worded on their job description, and making sure that it's reflected in your resume. Because that's what the ATS is looking for, but that's also what that first reader is going to be looking for. That first read of a resume, we generally have 4 to maybe 11 seconds to catch their attention. So making sure that the things that they've mentioned 3 or 4 times, oh my gosh, have that within your summary, have it highlighted in your key skills section, so that it catches their attention right away. And like I stated previously, if you have remote experience, make sure that you have that listed within the summary section. I also recommend any titles that you have within your resume that you have worked fully remote or partially remote, get that put right next to the titles as well, because generally when we're reading, we start from the top and go down, or we go left to right. So having the titles on the left-hand side and having them see fully remote, partially remote, virtual office, those types of things, that's going to catch their attention. And then there's a website out there called JobScan, where they give you 5 free scans that you can upload your resume on one side, put the copy and paste the job description on the right-hand side. It will analyze it for you and let you know what percentage that you're landing on, and see if there's any key terms that you've missed. Like I said, the great thing about them is that you get 5 free scans. After that, they're a business. They start charging you. For our members at FlexJobs, there is a partnership deal that we have. And so if people go on to watch our weekly webinars that we have, you'll get the link for us, the specific link to show that you're part of that partnership. And then you can get 5 free scans per month instead of 5 free per life.
Oh, wow, that's
which
awesome.
Can be helpful. Our customers have found it really helpful to be able to do that. It takes a little bit of the guessing out.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe that goes into this question then. So how long should one expect a job hunt to take? I mean, a lot of times, even just a traditional job hunt can be time consuming. But, just given the amount of competition and everything else going on in the remote space and the availability of positions versus the number of people looking for them and all that, like if I was going to make a decision, like, should I quit my day job and start hunting, or is this something you should do on the side, or what would your strategy be?
Okay, you missed my facial expression. No, don't quit your day job. It's always, it's easier to get a job if you have a job. Not to say that people that don't have jobs should look for jobs, but it's always easier to get a job when you have a job. According to Timeline, I don't have statistics for remote positions, but overall in the US, generally speaking, job search just takes longer than it should, and we feel, but it can take 10 to 15 applications before you land an interview. It can take 10 more interviews before you land that job offer that you want. Statistically speaking, they say it takes you get an 8% return for everything that you put out there. Now, some are going to move fast. Some are going to move snail's pace. And some of that is due to how the company's organized. If they're short-staffed, they may be running behind and getting in touch with people. Others are really ready to get somebody in there right away. And then even with remote positions, you still run into some of those things that we run into the traditional too of, well, I have to post the position, but I already know who's going to fill it. That just happens in life sometimes. And with all the technology that's out there, a lot of people don't realize that we can still do some of the old school things that we used to do for the brick and mortar of networking and following up with employers after you've applied. If you haven't heard anything within a week, find somebody on LinkedIn and figure out who their contact is with human resources. Ask where they are in the hiring process so you can get back some of that control on your job search process instead of feeling like you're just applying and it's going into a black void, because that can become very frustrating very quickly. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that just because a position is remote doesn't necessarily mean that that company can hire within your locale. So it's going to be really important to research and make sure that they can hire in whatever state or country that you're living in. On our site, there is an advanced search option that you can put your location in. It will kick out the ones that you're not eligible to apply for. For other sites, I'm not sure if they have that capability. So you might have to do a little bit more digging to make sure that they can consider you, because that's a horrible conversation for me to have as a career coach when I'm going back and looking at where somebody's applied and they're like, I've applied to 20 places and I have to go 18 of them. They can't even look at you because of where you live.
Yeah,
so keeping that in mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's really smart because, we talked a little bit before we started recording here, about that, and that being sort of an issue is, some of these guys, maybe they work in a third world country or something, but, for whatever reason, this employer can't work there or can't pay them there or whatever, so those aren't opportunities for those people. Not to say there aren't other opportunities elsewhere, but, that particular one. And, one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the application processes with some of these companies can be kind of time consuming. It's almost like putting together a project, to do this.
Right.
And so you really want to be selective with who you're choosing, so that you're not wasting your time. So to do the little bit of extra research, just to be sure that they can actually hire you if you got to that point, I think is really critical.
Right. And that is something that we're seeing with remote employers too, that should probably be brought to attention, that you just kind of touched on. With job search, takes a long time anyway, whether it's brick or mortar. They make you fill out an application, they make you do the resume, they make you do the cover letter. But some remote employers are also going to ask you, okay, you say that you can do ABC, prove it. Here's a small project. You have this amount of time to complete it and send it back to us. Generally speaking, that will be after the first interview or whatever, which for them really, that's good business, because it's remote employment. So we can say anything, we can do anything. But if you have to actually prove it before you're hired, that some corporations are starting to do that so that they don't get burned.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, and so on the other side of that coin, how does a job seeker start to narrow down and choose the jobs that they should apply for, like what sorts of things should be considered kind of a red flag? Like if I'm looking for remote work, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I know I want to work remote. Like, are there key indicators or things I should watch for? Because I imagine on, the other side of the coin, there's plenty of bad employees out there trying to find jobs.
Right.
I imagine there are plenty of bad employers too, that,
Right.
maybe want to be remote, but don't know that much about it or don't have policies in place. Like, is there anything from a job seeker's perspective that you can think of that would be red flags or things to be aware of?
One of the biggest ones when you're looking for a remote position is that if they're asking for you to send them money, no, that should never be happening, and that just screams scam. Or if they're asking for your banking information before you've even interviewed, or they shouldn't be asking for your banking information until after you've signed something and they say they're going to give you money. So just being careful about that, doing some Google searches on their company, because if somebody's been scammed before, they're going to put it out there and give information. Doing some research on Glassdoor can be huge to get a better understanding of the culture of a company, whether or not it's a legitimate company, because when people feel they've been burned, that's generally when they're going to go and put things out on the internet. For trying to figure out what you want to do within a remote position, or if you're wondering if it's something that you can do, because there's some positions that it's just an easier slide into a remote position, is doing some of that internal dialogue of what have I really enjoyed doing within my career? What kind of skills have I enjoyed utilizing? And maybe doing some of the search off of that instead of necessarily like a title, because some companies have become a little creative in what they call people anymore. And also realizing, generally speaking, for myself, for a good job, I enjoy at least 80% of it, and the other 20 I tolerate. Right? There's always going to be a little bit that we may not like, and so really doing some of that internal monologue of, okay, what do I want the 80 to be? So that I don't accidentally pivot into something that's going to bore me mindless or drive me crazy.
Yeah, no, I think that's good advice. I think it's a lot of people, especially older people, it seems, probably get caught in these traps of looking for title and trying, because we're so used to it, right? That's the vernacular or whatever. And I've seen a lot of that in the industry where, especially among tech companies and sort of digitally forward companies that get really crafty. Yes. Or even like, the marketing business, for example, like creative director means one thing at one company, but something totally different at another. It might
Very
be
much so.
VP level at one agency, where at another level or another agency, it's, in the art department,
Right.
So it could be sort of anywhere. So I think it's great to maybe look at it more of those individual skills or the individual traits of the position versus trying to, just base it on a title alone.
Yeah, I think the craziest ones I've seen, there was one IT and the title was technical guru.
Ooh.
Okay, well, generally speaking, people aren't going to use that as a search term. But the craziest one I ever saw was happiness consultant, and it was actually an HR person.
Oh, how funny.
Generally speaking, when people are looking for an HR position, they aren't putting in happiness consultant. So that's why I say be a little creative in what your job search is too, just in case they have been as well. And it can also help bounce back ideas of positions that you may not have known were even a thing. Because everything just keeps shifting and changing, especially within the technology world, that you may just kind of stumble upon your dream position without even realizing that was your dream till you read it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So let's kind of shift the conversation a little bit. So one of the big, driving factors behind this show, or the mission behind Teammate Apart, is this idea of helping both remote workers, but also those who hire them, and trying to bridge gaps and make them more able to work well together. So on the employer side of things, how do you screen for and find sort of the best candidates that are out there? Like, what sort of characteristics, we were talking about company red flags. What should I as an employer be looking for in terms of, red flags that might come our way?
Okay. I guess I'm not really following your question.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to find out, like, if I'm an employer and I'm screening for candidates, what sorts of things should I be looking for? Like, are there flags on a resume that are like, okay, this guy's faking it? Like, is there, things like that I should be aware of? And maybe
Yeah, I would say for red flags on that 90% of employers are already doing this, but when they have a resume in front of them, they're going to LinkedIn and they're going to see if it matches or is at least close. And if there is something completely different listed on the LinkedIn of what the actual responsibilities and accomplishments were, that's going to be a red flag. A pet peeve of employers, so what's really doesn't make a candidate stand out, I should say, is if they're just focusing on their tasks that they did in their previous position instead of what their accomplishments were or their achievements. Like an accountant, an organization that wants to hire an accountant knows what an accountant does. So there's no need to list out, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. It's really, how did you make the money or save the money? And especially if you can put dollar signs, numbers, or percentages against it, that will help them move forward. From an employer standpoint, which is not my forte, I'll give you that. Other red flags would be is if they aren't really connected with people on LinkedIn, and you run into that every once in a while, like they have 4 connections. Well, how much are you actually communicating or collaborating with your team, and how serious are you actually in applying for a position? Other red flags that there could be is that if their cover letter feels like a template, because it shouldn't. It shouldn't be too informal, but it really should paint a picture of who you are, what your skills are, but also why you're interested in that company and how you fit within that culture. And not just, they know that you're applying to a multitude of places, but they want to know why you want to work for them specifically. And if they have a cover letter in front of them that's just, it feels like you copied and pasted from something, that's going to be a red flag that, well, they're not really vested in working here.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I think that's good advice for both sides of the coin, right? Obviously, we want to try and put our best foot forward as a job seeker as well. Can you talk about, and maybe you just sort of alluded to it. Do we need to be doing custom applications for everybody we go for, or is it safe to like share one stock resume to everybody?
Don't just have one stock resume for everybody. Basically, your stock resume for everybody is your LinkedIn page or any other platform that you may have, a website or whatever. That's your one stock. But like I kind of mentioned previously, because so many employers are using applicant tracking systems, it really is gearing your resume every single time. Of course, you can have your one strong template, especially if you're going towards one type of position, but you're going to have to update that summary section to reflect exactly what they're looking for, and also within the key skills section, and making sure that the information that you have within your titles pertains to what they're looking for. And the cover letter should be reflective to what they're looking for as well. I'll be honest, only 54% from what we've heard of employers actually read cover letters, but I believe that remote employers are going to put more weight into reading the cover letters than in brick and mortar, because they're trying to gather as much information as possible. Whether or not employers using an applicant tracking system, they're still going to be looking for those key skills and traits that they have in their job description on that resume document. So it's really important to update it to reflect what they're looking for, because they may word things differently than another organization is going to word things. So if you just have one document, you may miss it because you're not speaking their speak.
Okay. Do you think, oh crap, I lost my train of thought. I had a really good idea.
It happens.
Yeah, I know, right? Too often, I'm afraid. Oh no. All right. Well, let's I guess kind of jump back a little bit to, I'm an applicant, I'm a job seeker, I'm ready to go to work. I've made it through maybe the first round of in the application process. I've gotten my first interview. We're starting to make some progress. Do you have any advice on like how to sort of prepare for that next step, how to prepare for an interview, how to get ready for, some of these skills tests and things like that are going to be thrown at you?
Okay. So if you've been contacted for an interview, the majority of time for remote positions, the interview is actually going to be via telephone. Some will use video, but the majority of them at this point in time they're just using telephone. So things that a lot of people don't think of that can be really good with phone interviews that you don't necessarily get face to face is you can have as many pieces of paper next to you as you want, and all those notes and the things that you think they might talk about, questions that you might or that you want to ask them, have that right next to you as you're talking to them. For phone interviews, I highly, highly, highly recommend smiling excessively. You will feel like the biggest dork ever, but the energy will come across onto with your voice, and you'll just sound friendlier to them. A lot of people will recommend that you stand so that you can get more oxygen while you are interviewing. For myself, that doesn't work for me because I'm a pacer. I have to sit to concentrate. But for others, it's going to work better. So that is for phone interviews. Then for video, LinkedIn actually has a practice video interviewing tool that you can utilize. I can send you the link if I haven't already, so you can put it in there. I don't have it offhand, and you don't have to have a paid subscription where you can actually practice video interviewing. It will give you feedback and you can watch yourself. So you can give yourself feedback as well. It's a really cool tool. One of the biggest things for interviewing that a lot of people don't remember to do, because only a quarter of them are doing it anymore, which breaks my heart, is send a thank you email that same day via email. Just doesn't have to be a novel. Just thank you for your time. Give them a little bit of information of what really excited you about the opportunity. Fling that out there because, like I said, 25%, 1/4 of people, that's it. That's all the people that are doing it. And I've literally seen decisions be made on who sent a thank you and who did not. And it's such an easy thing to do. So I just really got to put that out there.
Yeah. Well, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
much of this stuff, even despite being remote and despite all this technological advancement and everything, so much is still to do with that kind of human relationship part. And,
Right.
when you're working as a remote worker, maybe, or if you're trying to get remote work, there's some technological boundaries that are keeping you from all the aspects of a human relationship, eye contact and, touch on the shoulder or whatever, you're missing out on some of these things. So you, like, to your point about smiling a lot, like, you have to kind of amp it up a little bit,
Right.
for the online things, because you're basically trying to get across your personality. And it seems like there's so much discussion around the idea of cultural fit and trying to understand how you might fit into the culture of a company. Many of the skills that you might need, even if you weren't 100% on the skills, but you were teachable, you were friendly,
Right.
you're great to work with, like those kinds of things might be good. And I think to your point about thank you notes, and, thank you notes and smiling and all these things kind of in combination with one another, these are all like elements of real life relationships. These are things that you do with people you respect. These are things
Right.
you do with people who you want to have a ongoing relationship with.
Right.
And so taking that just extra couple steps, can be invaluable.
Yeah, it can be huge. And actually that 25% that I told you, that's across the board. That's even with brick and mortar. It's just people aren't doing it anymore, but employers still expect to have that happen because, as we all know, getting to that point that you actually get interviewed is a big deal. So we should be thanking them. And it does show that we are excited about the opportunity to work with them. Another thing that I forgot to mention before, prior to interviewing with a company, if it is going to be technologically based at all, find out which technology that they're using and make sure a day before, if it's an afternoon, morning, make sure all of your technology is in place. Because nobody likes having technological issues when you're supposed to be interviewing for a remote position where they want to make sure that you know how to use technology. And anybody that's been working remotely, things can happen, and it does. But have that happen. And then also sometimes, not always, but sometimes if you go on to glassdoor.com and look at the company, at times, if people have interviewed with that company previously and they've asked them a weird question, people will go onto the website and actually give that information of, hey, here's some questions that I was asked within the interview. Go ahead and look. A lot of times you'll be able to find that. And that really helped one of our candidates who was going for or customers that was going for a project management position. And the question was something along the lines of, if you had to fill a 747 with gumballs, walk us through the process of how you would make that happen. Well, it was great for her that she knew about that question 2 days before instead of having to think on her feet right away within the interview to make the project go smoothly. And she was able to kind of process that a little bit ahead of time.
No, I think that's good advice. And I mean, the moral of the story, I guess, is do your research, right? I mean, you should be looking up these companies and all that stuff prior to applying with them anyway. Yes. And so, if you just make it a practice that you do this research ahead of time, you go to these different resources, I think, it goes back to our comments at the, beginning of this podcast, the idea of just intention. You're being intentional about this, job. It's not just flippant. You're not just applying to every kid on the block.
Right.
You've picked this, position for one reason or another. It seems like a fit or whatever. And so now that you've made that decision, be intentional with it. Work with the people, try and develop relationships. There's still humans on the other end of that computer system.
Right.
Now there are the technological things that we have to try and work with and get around, these applicant tracking systems and things of that nature. But, if we can get beyond that, I think, we'll be more qualified or better able to be, good candidates by sort of being intentional with the things that we're doing.
Very much so. And like I said previously, of doing some of those old school things like reaching out to people, going on your LinkedIn, seeing if you have a second connection from somebody that could do an introduction before you apply or right after you apply. That can really help sometimes too, because even if you do everything correctly on your resume to get through the ATS, who knows, maybe it crashes one day. It's good to have that connection with somebody within the company where you can say, hey, did you get my information? So that they can go look for you. If you don't have that connection, they're not going to be doing that. And that's perfectly normal to do. Another thing too, is I kind of wanted to touch on was doing that preliminary research too. That's where you can put some of that information onto a cover letter of why you're interested in working for them specifically by going to the LinkedIn page, going to their webpage, seeing if they're, involved in the community or what their culture is. Try to get a good handle of what the culture is so that you can tell them specifically why you would be a good fit within their culture and what you like about their culture, because that is very important for remote employers too, not just the brick and mortar.
Well, yeah, and even for your own benefit, right? If you don't agree with their culture, or if there are aspects of it you don't like, then that's great. You've learned about it in advance before you jumped through 30 hoops and wasted everyone's time.
Very much.
So what do you think the role is? I mean, you sort of touched on it before, but I just kind of want to, drive it home real fast. So we've been talking a little bit about this, how I call it sort of the new old way. You still need to have real life human relationships and things like that. But you touched on earlier in the conversation, this idea of like sort of the value of networking. And there's the LinkedIn model, but also just sort of reaching out and getting to know people. I wonder if you just sort of talk about the role that sort of networking and relationships play in finding remote work as it pertains to, what you were just alluding to, this idea that if you have a connection at the office, you might be able to sidestep or sort of circumvent some of these, non-human intervention things that get in the way.
Right. And there's a lot of different ways to network, and it can be a little daunting when you're just trying to do it from technological standpoint. Like I said, trying to figure out if you have a second connection on LinkedIn, joining a LinkedIn group that may be focused on whatever you're looking for, like project management, remote. There's groups out there like that. Get into those groups because they may be posting information about what's available within their company, or they may know something of another opportunity that they might not be interested in, but somebody else might be interested in. Getting to know them a little bit as well. And then what a lot of people don't think to do all the time is just reach out to your organic network that may not even work remotely, and emailing them and family and friends and coworkers, or be careful with coworkers if you don't want them knowing that you're looking, but past coworkers, and saying, hey, these are the types of opportunities that I'm looking for. This is a little bit more information, or giving them like a sample of what you're looking for and asking them, can you look into your networks and see if you know anybody. Sometimes that can happen too. The one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, yes, going and looking for jobs on the internet is a very important step. But at least in the US, generally speaking, 80 to 90% of what is out there that are open positions is not necessarily listed anywhere. So as we look back onto our careers, how many times did we just kind of land into a position because somebody's like, oh, I'm going to have an opening, and Sarah knows Melissa, who knows John, and then all of a sudden John has a job because they tapped on him. They may not have known him, but Sarah and Melissa made that connection. So still doing those types of things. But what's really nice with that is then you don't have the competition of 1,000 people like you talked about earlier, because it's not posted anywhere. Or even for some people, they're going to be comfortable enough. If there's a company that you want to work for, contact them and do some cold calling and see if they have anything that's available. And especially for people that are comfortable with doing like freelance work instead of having to be an employee, sometimes they'll have a 20-hour-a-week contract that they haven't posted because they don't quite have the information or the project up to the level that it would be able to sustain somebody at 40 hours, but they might be able to do it for somebody that's willing to do 20 hours, and they just haven't posted it because they weren't quite ready for that yet. So just being a little creative in job search can really help your momentum moving forward too.
Yeah, I think that's huge advice. And especially this whole idea about, sort of I don't know, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever to get your way into the office, so many, and I can totally relate to what you're saying. I mean, almost every job I've ever gotten has come by way of somebody who I've had a relationship with. And I think that that's probably really common. And it's funny because I think on its face, you think of remote work and you just go, oh, well, it's somewhere out there in the internet. Why would this pertain to that?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's pretty easy to just go, okay, well, the way we find remote work is online because it's remote after all. But I think it's really important to sort of stress this human component too. And, just being intentional. You mentioned family and friends and stuff like that, just kind of saying out loud. I always have this thing I say about, like, in marketing or in the freelance world, where I, would be running out of projects and all this stuff. And I'm not a particularly spiritual guy, but I would always sort of put out there, just sort of say out loud, you know what, I'm ready for work. I need some work to come down. And, I think what it does is it sort of sets an intention and it sets a focus. And then when you run into people, you're like, oh, hey, oh, yeah, I'm looking for projects, no big deal, blah, blah, blah. You go on about your day. Maybe they don't have anything for you, but you never know when so-and-so knows somebody who will then come back and say, hey, we're actually looking for somebody that does that, or I've got a buddy that does, or whatever. And so I think it's really important to just sort of carry yourself that way, and sort of be intentional with all that stuff.
Very much so.
So cool. Well, Betsy, I think we're getting sort of to the end of this thing. Okay. Tell people where they can find out more about you and what you do over at FlexJobs, maybe a little about FlexJobs, the platform itself, and how people can engage with you guys.
Okay. So we can be reached at flexjobs.com, and we are a membership job search site. So there's a little tiny fee, but with it, what we have that I think is absolutely awesome, and actually I started using FlexJobs before I got a job at FlexJobs, is that we have a department of people that go through positions, remote positions and flexible positions out there, and make sure that they're legitimate before they are posted onto our website. And so it's legitimate remote or flexible positions or partial remote, just a whole plethora there, that they have to have some sort of flexibility on our site that you can whittle down into your location, how much remote you want to have. And then there's a vast amount of resources as well. Like we have weekly free Q&A webinars that me and 2 other people kind of rotate within our career coaching team, that people can come on for free and ask, like, should I have an objective on my resume? Or I'm looking for this type of work. Why can't I find it? And why aren't people getting back to me? And we answer a lot of those questions. And then we also have in our career services where we do one-on-one coaching as well for a slight fee, and then the resume writing, or you can bundle it as well. In all honesty, I mean, FlexJobs, it's so huge and has so many resources that it's hard to bring it down into a nutshell, but it is another great tool to put into your tool belt as you're searching for positions, and just getting more information about remote work and what it's like in the world and what it's like in the US, because we do have a lot of blogs and articles that are very specific to this field of work as well. We're all very passionate here about the work that we do because we walk the walk. Everyone within FlexJobs, we all work remotely. Some are in big cities. I'm in a town of like 197 and still able to continue on with my career without having to drive an hour and a half to get to the office, which is a beautiful thing. It makes me very happy. Yes, it's great. And that's our goal and that's our passion, is to help people that want to work remotely or have some sort of flexibility within their career to move forward. because we just see this as the wave of the future. It's not always going to be somebody sitting in an office day in and day out and having to do long commutes.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. And I think that's a great way to sort of cap this thing off. So thank you so much, Betsy, for coming on. I really appreciate you. I'm glad we're able to make this happen. And everybody check out FlexJobs.com. And Betsy, can they reach out to you on LinkedIn or anything? Do you have any kind of link or something where people can find you specifically?
Yep, I can send that to you. It's just Betsy Andrews FlexJobs, so I should be pretty easy to find.
We'll throw it in the show notes also. So cool. Well, thanks so much, Betsy. I really appreciate you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks.
I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you anything.